Well, welcome everyone. We would like to welcome you to our webinar. It is dedicated to the strategy of the climate risk management for the international financial institutions, And before we start discussing the main topic, well, I would like to explain to those who are not going to listen webinar in Ukrainian language, and they will have to listen it in English, please. At the bottom of the screen, you can see the globe icon. You can push it, and you can use the language of communication. And for you, it's going to be English. And our activity is carried out on the very important topic, and it has been developed by the Association of the Experts of Sustainable Development with the Ukrainian relevant teams and with the support of the IFC. And this activity is not a one-time activity. It's being carried out within the framework of the monthly project, the webinar of international sustainability. And we are discussing very important topics during these workshops to carry out the promotion of implementation of the values of sustainable development for the market of the financial institutions of Ukraine. We are working today until 12:30 Ukrainian time, and we have the very important experts present here, the representatives of the community, which are going to share very valuable information, which will help you to resolve the issues of the climatic risks. So Andriy Zaripov is going to speak today. He is the head of the projects on the climate issues, and he is representing, if you see, Ms. Nadiya Ryazanova, the expert on the financing of the development in cooperation with the commercial banks to develop the strategies of the risk management, the sustainable financing, and implementation of the green instrument. Hussein, Anooshah, the specialist on the financial development of the IFC, Mr. Danilenko, the deputy head of the financial stability of the National Bank of Ukraine, and Mr. Andriy, the head of the Department of the Management of the Social and the Environmental Risks of Ukrgasbank, and the head of the subcommittee and this of the ASG, the Independent Association of the Banks of Ukraine. And the honor to moderate this very important event is given to me. I am Andriy Menkin, and I am the head of the Department of Sustainable Development of the Lviv Bank and a member of the group of experts of Ukraine on sustainable development. The question of the climatic risks is being discussed on daily basis, and people who are working on the ISG issues and sustainable development are familiar with it, and this is always on our agenda. But it's not a very simple issue as it might look at the first glance. On the one hand, we can hear the appeals of the international partners, regulators, and other stakeholders about the importance of this issue. But on the other hand, well, various news are coming up today. Let us think about it. Let us try to look at it from a different angle. But all of us understand that in Ukrainian reality, this topic is going to be relevant for us for a long period of time. I would like to share my experience of Lviv Bank, in spite of the fact that the social risks are being assessed by us since long ago, but implementation and a deeper analysis of the climatic risks started to be developed by us quite recently. We started from the basic things. We started from the map of the water resources, started from the assessment of the modernized approaches. And when we are delving deeper in this topic, we understand that things are not as simple as it might seem from the first glance, and there are more questions than answers available. And that's why it will be interesting to hear the attitude of our experts and our community on how these issues are being seen by the IFC, and Mr. Andriy Zaripov is going to talk about it in a moment. And how do you see the possibility of implementation, and how you can see the vectors which exist in the market so that we can start discussing them in the Ukrainian reality, and to understand in general what impact it's going to be produced on our future and on our capacities. So, Mr. Andriy, please unmute your microphone. Thank you, Andriy. And I hope that you can hear me now. I'm going to share my presentation in a moment. Good morning, esteemed participants of this webinar. I'm very happy to speak at this event and to start communicating with you since morning, discussing the topic of climatic risks. We, together with our team, have prepared, I hope, a set of interesting information on this topic. And this topic, as Andriy has mentioned already, is quite a new topic at present, and I would like to underscore that we are working on it in 15 countries of our European region, and Ukraine, in this case, is not lagging behind in this case, because other countries are only starting to implement these aspects into their activities at present. But it's very important to start as soon as possible, because there are very specific things which are related to this topic. But I would like to start my presentation and our discussion from These are some technical issues which I'm facing at present, but now we can see your slide screen. And I would like to start from the following. The climate changes are not do not depend on policies. They exist as a fact of life, and nobody can cancel the effects of the climate change. And we, on our behalf, are looking at this topic from the point of view of the business, from the business angle. And it's no secret that for your clients, and I mean the financial institutions, clients, the topic of climate is not the most important topic to take care about. And while the institution thinks we should not change our practices at present to reduce the impact of the climate change, this is not a driver. It's not a factor which really changes the attitude to these issues. But on the other hand, all of us, even those who do not represent the business, feel what climate change impact affects our health. The summers become hotter and warmer, and this really impacts us. The precipitations are not sufficient to properly work in the agrarian sector, and all other things are being felt by us. And in this case, we look at this topic from the point of view of the necessity of taking it into account in our work. But it's necessary to do it to be able to manage the risks which we are facing and to be prepared for such changes. And this opens a lot of business perspectives for the institutions, a lot of business perspectives from the point of view of need of financing of such changes. And also it opens a lot of business perspective for the business which is implementing it. This is about the sustainability from the point of view of business. So we are not saying that this should be a driver from the point of view of regulator, but we are saying that it's great then everything is being supported by the proper strategy from the point of view of the regulator. But on the other hand, we are supporting the idea that if there is a business case and if it works, even without the state support, it's going to be a sustainable activity. It's going to work and it's going to yield results. What we can see, since several years ago, the number of climate calamities and catastrophes has increased. I started to work for IFC 17 years ago in the area of agrarian insurance. And at that time, I was working on the analysis on the transition. And at present, the approach to forecasting has changed significantly. Previously, we were looking at the focus and we were trying to use the historic data, and we actually use the historic data on the basis of the 20 or 30 years, and we were trying to focus on the basis of this historic data, but now this approach doesn't work. We have to simulate at present. The historic data do not have that, weight it used to have in the past. We can see that the costs are growing, increasing. The costs which are related to the risks, climate risks, up to 280 billion for only within 2023, where the losses resulted as the losses due to the climate catastrophes and also man-made catastrophes as well. And also the decrease of GDP by 18% is being focused within the within the next 30 years. And that's a very negative indicator. But on the other hand, I would like to talk about the opportunities. If we take the focused up till 2050, the need of financing to achieve the targets and to take into account all these risks, the climatic risks. So the need of financing is $270 trillion. And these are huge amounts, huge numbers. And here, the opportunities emerge here to be able to finance these changes. And we can see that there is an impact at different levels. If we look at the climatic risks, they are being grouped into the strategic risks and with the physical risks, which was mentioned by Andriy. He mentioned, first of all, the assessment of the maps of the water usage, the assessment of the possibility of floods. This is more about the physical risk assessments, and we are going to discuss it in detail, and Hussein is going to talk about it later. And we also have the risks which are related to the natural disasters. The floods is one of those risks, or the heat waves, for example. The temperature changes and heat waves, and there are chronic risks, and this is when the patterns, temperature patterns are changed, and the ocean water level is changing, and the decrease of level of water.
Also, we have transitional risks, and they are related to policies and regulations when there are additional tax being enforced and when technology changes. And we have now more effective electro cars, solar generation. That also has place when the consumer preferences change. Also, we look at the transmission channels, which are the macroeconomic and microeconomic factors. When climate change has a significant impact on business, one example of that can be agricultural business, which can be highly correlated with climate change. Others, it's generation business, brown industry, cement production, all kinds of metallurgical and mining businesses, also fossil coal mining. The other question, how can we reduce the impact of emissions? Anything related with fossil fuels is coming to an end, and that also creates a problem of emissions. And we can, of course, debate for a long time how they impact climate change, whether it's a natural climate change phase that our planet has gone through several times in the past. We can argue about that, of course, whether it's a natural climate change wave or is that truly related to human activity. But one thing we cannot avoid is that truly the climate change is here and now, and we have to adapt to that. We also have business risks related to financial risks and non-financial risks. Non-financial risks include reputational, strategic, physical security, And in the same way, when we talk about financial risks, we have to take into account credit risks, market risks, liquidity risks, and others. So climate change has an impact on many levels, and not only on financial institutions, but on all other businesses and human activity. Why do we have to consider climate-related risks separately? And what does that include? Well, when we talk about climate-related and environmental risks, we mean ongoing identification, analysis, assessment, and mitigation of the impact of those risks. Even at the stage of project planning, not only during the project implementation, but while designing and planning the project as well. And it's very important to understand how different risks can impact. And there are several strategies. One of them is, okay, we are not going to do that. We don't understand those risks. Let's not get into that. We are not going to finance cement production. But actually, these are the industries that need the most financing, the most support to do the transition. And when we talk about the right risk management strategy, we mean the set of different specific components. And we don't only talk about financial institutions, but today this is the focus of our topic and the focus of our project. And I know that we have participants here, not just from the financial institutions, but it is also relevant for other businesses. But when we talk about risk management, we mean first of all, availability of policy, where we identify what we are going to do, what we are financing, and what we are not financing. Also, we need to have the relevant procedures for identifying, assessing, minimizing, and monitoring climate-related and environmental risks. We also need to ensure that we have organizational capacity and human capital. And it has to be about the right expertise in the organization. Because to design the right strategy and implement it, the staff capacity has to be up to date about the new technologies and new risk mitigation methods. So it's not something that we do once. This is an ongoing exercise that we have to do continuously. In the same way, it is very important to have the so-called emergency preparedness and response, to be ready to what might happen and to know what we should do. And as an example of financial institution, what will happen if flood happens? Like we have certain assets that we are financing, and they're located in the areas where floods are a significant risk. How can we reduce those risks with our clients? Perhaps those clients are not even aware of the risks, and we need to make sure to help them to understand the impact of those risks on their businesses and how they can continue being our clients. In the same way, internal and external disclosure and communications have to be planned. Internal and external reporting as well. And today we are going to talk about this slide a lot, and I want you to focus your attention on this slide. We worked on that a lot. A lot of people are talking about Paris Agreement. Some people talk about climate risk management, and there might be an impression that it's all about the same thing. But it's actually very important to differentiate between these two things: the transition plan and adaptation plan. When we talk about the Paris Agreement, which declares that we need to maintain the increase in the global average temperatures to well below 2 degrees, which is not actually happening very well. But why is it so important? Because if we have the increase of global temperatures above 2 degrees, then the processes will start that we will not be able to control. This is about physics, actually. It may lead to catastrophic changes, which people will no longer be able to effect. And the Paris Agreement puts a lot of focus on how we can move from those technologies and industries that emit a lot of greenhouse gases and carbon to a more climate-friendly technology. So this is about a plan to have this transition to reduce the emissions. On the other hand, we have the adaptation plan, where we have those physical risks or transition risks, but mostly physical risks, as Andriy mentioned before, using the example of the flood. We need to have a specific plan to adapt to those climate change events and its impact. So there are two different concepts, but they're united together. So on one hand, we have emission and low carbon economy. On the other hand, is adapting to climate change, and it's all united in business strategy. Why we cannot talk about sustainable finance without transitioning to net zero? I've already talked about that. A lot of people are saying that, well, if this is difficult, we are not going to finance that. But if we are not going to finance that, we won't be able to have this real high quality transition. For example, cement is one of the industries that produce a lot of greenhouse gases. And also, it's an energy intensive industry. On the other hand, we understand that without cement, there will be no construction. And without construction, there will be nothing happening. Even when we build wind and solar energy plants, we need cement, we need construction. So we need to find new tools, new instruments to produce so-called green cement. But to make this transition for the producers that are disseminated in different countries and regions, there are thousands of them, we need to give them access to the right technology. We need to finance them. And in the same way, they need access to the capital. They need to have the right expertise so that these businesses and financial institutions know how to accept this risk. And it's important to promote this transition. And we need to also consider business capacity, because if you just put pressure on the businesses to move towards net zero, I suppose we won't see many changes if there is no specific goal inside or some tangible benefits and values for the relevant businesses. So as an example, we are actually implementing one pilot project in a region in Romania, where we are assisting a financial institution to create an expertise in transition finance. When financial institutions understand their clients, especially those that are working in energy intensive and emission intensive sectors, they need to understand which financial products and services they can offer in line with the EU requirements and how that can be packaged into the financial instruments. So, Andriy, if I understand you correctly, after reviewing this problem, I think we all agree that there is a serious problem with climate change. You can promote some solutions, some tools that you can present during this webinar. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for moving to that. I understand I'm taking a bit more time than planned. Yeah, this will be like a review what is happening in Romania and other countries, or perhaps Nadiya. I understand that Nadiya is going to speak next. She can give us a good overview of what approaches and tools and strategies can help businesses and all market participants to be more prepared.
Or is this the question to you? Oh, no, I'm going to pass the floor to Nadiya. And thank you very much for talking about the importance of this aspect, because we understand that people have different visions. Some institutions are using certain sources and they have their own convictions. And we have to listen to the professionals, to the experts who are implementing these similar projects in a lot of European countries. And this experience is very important and valuable for Ukraine. So, Ms. Nadiya, we would like to give the floor to you, and we are expecting to get the proposals from you and just giving us the tips how we can do that. Ms. Nadiya, are you with us? Yes, sure. I'm trying to screen my presentation. And now the presentation, I would like to share my presentation.
Ми бачимо зараз на слайді номер 12, Надію.
А я взагалі їх чомусь не бачу. Так, зараз. Так, ще екран.
Давайте ви починайте, я спробую ще
Why
раз.
don't you start, Ms. Nadiya, but I will try to share the presentation once more. Let's do it this way. First of all, I would like to thank you for participating in this event. We are going to follow up the topic about the topic of risk management. As Andriy quite properly mentioned, as of today, the society feels the necessity of working on the topic of the climate risks. The risks for the financial and non-financial institutions is quite is not new, but the issues which are related to the climate have emerged well, relatively recently. And when we are talking about the risk management aspect, so we have to look at wider approach. What the community thought when this topic started to be discussed. As Andriy mentioned, it's not a political issue, and this is not about the regulatory activities of the states, but actually we look at the real situation of the climate change, of the change in nature, and they encourage us to do actions. And we can see as of today.
Надя, у вас є контроль, ви можете
Ага.
контролювати слайди.
Ага, спробую.
Там вони можуть трішечки у вас з затримкою, то ви не поспішаєте.
Затримка, да, нічого, да.
Будь ласка.
Да, все правильно. Отже, давайте
Let us look at the topic of risk management from the point of view, from the lens of the Paris Agreement, and let's look at it from the point of view when the society started to think about it on the global level, and it was decided that the climate change topic is very important. It has to be addressed. In 1992, the topic started to be discussed, and you can see a lot of milestones here on this slide. But as of today, we can see the situation when almost every year, annually, on the global level, the conferences are being carried out by the United Nations, and in December 24 in Azerbaijan there was a conference, and not only the questions of climate were discussed there, but the additional issues were raised there, and this is the issue of water, and the topic of climate adaptation to the climate change and mitigating the climate change are being discussed, and also new, very specialized directions of the activities are being identified. This is a question of water. This is also related to the climate and the environment. But today we are going to look further, and also the questions of climate and the wider notion of environmental issues are being discussed. And these approaches and focuses are being made on water, and also the questions of development of biodiversity are also very relevant because it has a positive impact on minimizing the climate change effects or getting adapted to the climate change. But this information is very important. And the slide is very important for the business, not simply to general understand what is the general background for implementing regulations and on the climate change. And we are going to provide more information about that. But also it is very important when all the financial institutions and so that the businesses to create the risk management system have to develop the internal policies on risk management, and it should be based on certain principles and bases. And these principles are formulated in the global concepts, such as the Paris Agreement of 2015. It was passed 10 years ago, and the basic principles have been formulated that of the sustainable economy, which we call it now. It's sustainable to what? To the environmental and social risks. In this case, we are talking about the climate risk challenges. And then this idea is being developed in further documents, and it gives us an opportunity to build the risk management system. Each business has to understand for itself the general background on which the system of risk management is being developed. And this background is the policies of the global level as for the climate change. And today, we have already mentioned the Paris Agreement of 2015. Why this agreement was very important for the topic of climate risks issues. First of all, the agreement has been signed there, and the 197 countries of the world have joined this convention, which was related to the counteracting climate change and the development of the sustainable economy. And the goals of the sustainable development have been formulated as 17 of those sustainable development goals. And it's important for the risk management and climate risk management in particular, because the sustainable development goals envisage a decrease of the greenhouses effect, water efficiency, energy efficiencies, and they are the indicators of the achievement of these goals. And the information which proceeds from the sustainable development goals at the level of the nations, of the countries, and we have national sustainable development goals, and they are being chosen by the countries depending on the peculiarities of its economy and so on and so forth. And the each country is developing the businesses on the basis of the goals which are followed by the specific businesses. And the Paris Agreement on the issues of climate is very important for development of the system of climate risk management in the banks, because it actually provides the targets. And as Andriy mentioned, it's actually established this 2 degrees increase of temperature in comparison with the pre-industrial level. This is a sort of relevant, and also the temperature, global temperature, should not be raised above this level. Otherwise, we will lose the control over the events. So, if the institution is developing the business or creates a system of management of the climate risks or environmental risks, they are analyzing the projects from the point of view of its impact on the greenhouse emissions. And also, there are certain calculations. And they calculate how much the institution was able to decrease the greenhouse emissions, and at the expense of the projects which are oriented to the sustainable development. And here it is very important to know that at this conference, the 2 directions of the work of the climate change issues were established at this conference. This is the minimizing the effects of the climate change and also the climate risk adaptation. And it was quoted as an example, but I would like again to remind you of the following. When we are talking about the minimizing the impact, and that this is the decrease of the emission of the greenhouse gases, and if we are talking about the adaptation, so if the object is located, for example, in the area which are known for the floods threat, so the dams are being constructed there, or if it's an agricultural company and it is located in the arid areas, so they have to use the varieties which are resilient to the droughts. So the question of climate is becoming more and more widely looked at. And this is a question of water as well, which is coming up in terms of the environmental targets and goals. This is related to the better usage of the water resources. And
Так, повертаємося. Важливо дуже, окрім такої загальної,
apart from the general framework, and in addition to the decisions which are taken at the global conferences under UN and the resolutions which are being passed in terms of the climate issues, and also this defines the policy of the states, and the regulators transmit these requirements to the financial and non-financial institutions, and this is to be taken into account while the policies of the risk management frameworks are being developed. we have to look at the methodological recommendations, guidelines, and which exist at present. And a lot of countries have developed how to manage risks, well, directly, or a number of documents are being prepared which are necessary to identify risks, to declare those risks, to report on the situation which might occur in the institutions, including the financial or non-financial institutions in the banking sector. And you can see here only the several examples of legislation of the European Union on these issues. And this is a very important topic for Ukraine. It's very relevant for Ukraine, the legislation of the EU, because at present, the regulatory bases and frameworks are being developed very rapidly. And this trend is irreversible. And the question for the banking and non-banking institutions and for the business is very relevant. And we have to make a transition to risk management, climate risk management, and the climate risks and the environmental risks and other risks as well. Also social risks and those which are related to the corporate governance, and this is the ESG risks. But the financial relations are conceptually being changed, and we look differently at how to manage the financial resources. And we look at all these regulatory documents and the guidelines which are issued in the European Union. So some of them are voluntary, have a voluntary nature, but some, and they are not mandatory. But some of them are becoming mandatory. And they are related, first of all, to the following. You've heard a lot already at previous meetings which was dedicated to the sustainable development. They are related to the question of the taxonomy. The taxonomy of the sustainable economic activities, it's a key document here. And it was developed as a fundamental document. And each of these documents, it's not simply a declaration or a message, but this is a working document. And they are underpinned by the scientific research. And, well, it is necessary to implement them. And as regulatory document includes methodological guidelines, and it helps us to implement them. So if we take, for example, the taxonomy, it has been developed in 22. It was according to the two goals. It was related to the climate change and adaptation thereof, and then other environmental goals have been added to that. And what is important is that this taxonomy spells out in detail a lot of those issues. And apart from that, in this legislation,
also
the questions of disclosure of information, non-financial information, mandatory disclosure of non-financial information is mentioned. But it's not just a directive of the necessity to disclose the information, but also there is European standards of the mandatory reporting.
As we know, IFRS reporting standard. And currently, the regulatory, methodological, and other acts adopted by the European regulators are very well spelled out. And for Ukraine, we are in a very beneficial position because there are others that we can learn from, and we can just apply them. Nadiya, I apologize for interrupting. I think we are a little bit behind the schedule, and if possible, to speed up a little bit and move to the most practical aspects, it would be much appreciated, because we will definitely share the slides with the participants. I know you have so much to say, and I apologize for interrupting. We just want to make sure to cover all the planned points in the agenda. Okay, I will move on. I will skip a few slides. If the issue of taxonomy is actually quite practical, and when a project comes into a bank, or if there is a non-banking institution is trying to finance some project, it needs to go through a certain screening, whether this project is aligned with the approaches and criteria of sustainability. And for that, we can use the EU taxonomy of sustainable activities. And there are 6 environmental goals here, which we have already discussed: climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, sustainable use and protection of water and marine resources, which is a separate goal in taxonomy. There is a transition to a circular economy. There is the also pollution prevention and control, and protection and restoration of biodiversity and ecosystems. So for any project to be approved for lending, financing, it has to go through this EU taxonomy screening. And if it is aligned with that, then the minimum risks can be identified. The climate risks, first of all, and then anybody can verify. Am I moving the slides, or someone else is moving the slides? I am moving the slides because I think we need to speed up even more and move to the practical cases. I apologize if you can just wrap up. Yes, there are some questions in the audience also talking about the practical cases and application, and everyone was happy to know that the presentations will be shared with the participants. Okay, I just wanted to focus that the financial risks are transformed into physical and transitional risk, and our colleague Hussein will talk in more detail about that. So thank you, Nadiya. And then I have a question to Mr. Hussein. I know, and I guess you will talk about this, that there is a great tool that helps the financial institutions to implement and accept those challenges and analyze them. And it will be very interesting to hear about some practical cases, how we together with you, with the support of your instruments, can do what Andriy and Nadiya talked about. So, Mr. Hussein, please take the floor.
Thanks, Andriy. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible. What I want to do is give you more like a practical view on how climate risk is done. I want to demystify everything that we're talking about here, and it's coming from experience in Africa. I'm in Mongolia now, Middle East, Caucasus. How does the climate risk actually be integrated within financial institutions, and what do you actually do once you've run that analysis? So at the end of the day, this table right here, I mean, you'll probably want it a bit more detailed, but this in essence is capturing what you as a bank or the financial institution should aim to do. I look at my portfolio across my different sectors and across my different locations, or in most instances, you'll look at across municipalities or regions, what have you. And then I want to dissect physical risk and transition risk drivers that are going to impact who I lend to. So for physical risk, to make it the most simple, it's think insurance terms. It's entirely location based. If the entity that I am financing is prone to drought, I want to know, are they thinking about drought? Have they made any plans to combat drought? If they're looking at things like sea level rise or what have you, are they making investments, or do they, when you question management, when you do your due diligence, are the entities familiar with these long-term risks? And then the onus is on a financier to demonstrate, okay, what are your options? So if it's like, I work a lot in the Middle East, if it's 50 degrees Celsius, there's not a lot going to be growing in that soil, no matter what kind of adaptation stuff you do, right? So there's some of those conversations need to be happening as well. But in essence, for physical risk, we map out the hazards. So at IFC, we'll look at your portfolio, we'll map out these different hazards across the country. And we have probabilities. We'll develop probability of an intense hazard happening. Intense meaning, let's say for flood, if it's above 20 centimeters over 3 days, or if it's drought, I don't know the exact words, but if it's like over 30 or 35 degrees Celsius in the 3-day interval, we model these things out as granular as possible. But when you're starting out for a bank, most of your location data is where your business is registered, and obviously your business is registered usually in the capital. So there's a nuance here. So there's like a first iteration of when you do your assessment, and then a second iteration. So that's the physical risk. And on the transition risk, you want to look at your portfolio in terms of what potential policy, technology, market shift could impact these different sectors. And we call them risk factor pathways. So you have like direct emissions, indirect emissions, you have impact on revenue, you have impact on capital expenditure. So example, if you're a coal power generator, all right, typically that's going to be very high transition risk. Why? Well, if we decide globally that we need to address climate risk very fast, then it's very likely that the government in Ukraine or regionally or EU will start imposing very strict criteria on those producers of energy that are coming from high emission fossil fuels, right? And so that's what this direct emission cost is. We'll look at how much emissions you're generating, and we're going to hit you per ton of CO2 emitted. And that's what's done at the EU. So the EU has its emission trading scheme. And every entity within the EU, every major sector emits, right? Emits carbon. And that carbon is priced in the market in the EU. It's traded like a stock market. So following the war, right? It shot up from 70 or 60 euro per ton of CO2 to 122 euro per ton, right? And in the EU, companies, particularly, let's look at energy or power sector. All power sector entities in the EU, any emission that they release, they have to pay the spot price, right? So these are the types of mechanisms where transition risk is trying to quantify. The other aspect here, again, going back to coal, if you're a coal producer, you need to spend a lot more money through capital expenditures in the near term to alleviate transition risk, which means you need to transfer to renewable energy, cleaner technologies, even like natural gas, nuclear, what have you, as long as you're bringing down your emissions, right? And so what that gets down to the point is you do this across the sectors. What does each sector need to do? Not even within the sector, but your counterparties. Some counterparties might be renewable energy. They're pretty good. Some energies are coal. And you look at it by the counterparty. And when you have that picture, then you can make money-making decisions in terms of opportunities. So, as Andriy was discussing earlier about our work in Romania, they have a lot of natural gas infrastructure. They've had nuclear, they got hydro, what have you. Our goal there is, all right, how can we persuade companies there to transition? Well, sustainable linked loans seems like a good option. If we're not familiar with sustainable linked loans, basically it's saying, I give you an entity, right, a company, 100 mil. I don't care what you do with it, as long as you are meeting targets that we have agreed with you. And those targets usually are like emission intensity. Emission intensity meaning we expect your emission intensity per unit of output. So think of energy again, megawatt hours. So if you increase megawatt hours, I would like to see your emissions come down per megawatt hour. Usually that's done by energy efficiency. If you're like investing in distribution transportation of the infrastructure, because this is like natural gas infrastructure. If you're investing more in independent power producers that are providing renewable sourced power to your utility, etc. If you're doing nuclear, you're making improvements to mainly efficiency, methane leakage for gas, etc. All of these things, we give you 100 million, you do it, and we just need to see that emission intensity is coming down, right? So that's sustainable linked. And that's like the coolest thing these days globally. Everyone's talking about sustainable linked. And in similar ways, in these other sectors, you can follow the same logic. We just need to understand what it is that the sector at the heart needs to be doing from a technology perspective, from a business model perspective, slowly changing, right? And then we can give money to that change. And that's called financing the transition. Or if you want to be super technical, I would avoid transition finance. And then this is climate, but you think also wider sustainability, because I know, look, Ukraine has other sustainability issues. You can package all of these other sustainability KPIs, women-owned businesses, improvement in access to youth businesses, medical services, etc., and then have those KPIs, key performance indicators, linked to those loans. And so that's how you tackle these risks, right? So I just wanted to give you a quick overview, and I see that we're switching slides because of the time, but I think it was worth.
Hussein, sorry for interrupt you, but we have only 2-3 minutes for finalize.
Yep, no worries. Okay, so in terms of the risk management, like you're looking at the 4 pillars, which are governance, risk management, strategy, metrics, and targets. These will alleviate IFC standards, EBRD standards, IAB, etc. They're all looking for progress across these different areas. Next slide. Is it me or you? Okay. Oh, and then from a risk perspective, okay, so you're looking, when you do a materiality assessment, it's a climate risk materiality assessment. This is more interesting for bank risk management. You look at exposure analysis, which is what I just discussed. You look at your assets relative to transition physical risks. And then you look at kind of like a sensitivity scenario analysis, typically narrative based, but then when you get more advanced, you get into more quantitative based. And then this gives you climate adjusted probability of default, climate adjusted expected credit loss. And these are really, at the end of the day, what you're looking for, because then you're speaking banker language, risk management language. After you've done the materiality, you update. Just like you do anything else on your risk policy, your risk inventory. Maybe you change your sector policy. Maybe you change your risk appetite limits. Maybe you integrate it into stress testing. So that's a key component. And then capital allocation. So you've run your physical transition risk, and then you figure out if those are material, do I need to add a capital buffer per those different types of risks? Mostly you find it in the credit risk. They're usually integrated into credit risk. In some instances, you might have operational management, but most often it's in the credit risk pillar. And then, okay, some examples when you find material risk in these different sectors. Okay, what do you do after that? Well, as a bank, you need to have a strategic response, as I was talking about. You put out products out there that are going to help the transition. Worst case, which last case that you don't want to do is divestment. So you want to engage with your clients and help them along the transition. You don't want to just cut off the funding just like that. And then some key risk indicators typically that you will find in climate is portfolio alignment, financed emissions, and you've probably heard of this already, and various limits. It could be relative or absolute, and you will change these based on your sensitivity analysis. Now, I mean, the key piece is, so materiality that we were just talking about, just as the regs that we're talking about, everything is based on materiality. You're not supposed to do everything for every sector. You're supposed to analyze in your portfolio, what are the risks that I'm materially exposed to? Typically, it's like 2 or 3. And then you take those 2 or 3 and you develop a strategy vis-a-vis your transition plan. And that's essentially what you're trying to elaborate to your stakeholders of how you're tackling those material risks. And then finally, it touches on, that transition plan touches on, what are we doing from a bank perspective for governance? Are we going to have a sustainability committee? Do we have a board champion that is a know-it-all on sustainability, right? It could go either way. It's not necessarily a copy and paste here. This is based on how the bank is set up. Business and credit strategy. Maybe your business is going after those higher risk elements, but do you have something in place to minimize the residual risks? And then upskilling and data. Those are like probably the biggest ones, and I left it for last. So upskilling, right? Like we're doing now. But upskilling is a continuous process, not just the risk folks, not just the sustainability folks. It's also the business banking folks who on the ground need to understand when a client comes to me, I can quickly assess, oh, you're based in this location or you're based in this carbon intensive sector. You know what? You are potentially a material risk for us. We want to engage with you. We have some advice. Maybe there's some products. Maybe there's some different advice on business models that we can provide them so that they stay and build value with us and going forward. All right. And then data is the last piece, last but probably the most important piece, right? Left it for last. So data is key, and data is where you see the most pushback and most challenges is the bottleneck. But there are ways around that. So you can do proxies. You can do ESG questionnaires, what have you, to get the necessary data that you need. It's not a huge bottleneck when you look through how you can bridge those gaps. And the last piece is climate stuff. It's based on an imperfect data. The data will be imperfect for the future, right? For like the next 5 years. We need to manage it and figure out ways in which we can still work with what we have to tweak the analytical piece and the product piece so that we can grow climate resilient portfolios and create value for the clients. All right, and I think that's it. And if you got questions, feel free in the chat.
Дуже дякуємо, дуже дякуємо. Перший висновок, який я
Thank you very
зробив,
much. The first conclusion I have made from this presentation that our speakers have a huge expertise and they have a lot of knowledge which they can share with them. Should we be given 5 or 6 hours for this discussion, they will be able to really explain us deeper the importance of this topic, which we are trying to discuss superficially at present, getting the understanding of all the important activities we have to start Yeah, and then, well, we actually superficially touch upon this topic, and then we start to, the deeper we go, the more we understand that more work has to be done on that. So I believe that we are going to continue discussing these issues, and maybe just break up this topic into very specific block of issues. But actually, I would like to thank all the speakers who gave us a story. You have gave us a historic perspective, and you told us about the importance of the issue, and then us talk about the real situation which evolves in Ukraine at present. And that's why I would like to give the floor to Andriy Danilenko, the representative of the regulator. And quite recently, we have received from you the information, and we understand that a lot of work is being done by the National Bank of Ukraine, and this topic has become very relevant at present, and it is being implemented, and it is being developed, and this work is being supported by the international expert. And actually, my question is whether the National Bank of Ukraine is thinking about the integration of the climate risks into the policy of environmental and social risks. And what is your opinion about it? What is the strategy of the National Bank of Ukraine in this area? Thank you, Mr. Andriy. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. And the National Bank of Ukraine, more and more attention is paying to the climate risks, which are perceived as part of the ESG risks, which were discussed today. And I would like to thank the previous speakers for that. And after their presentations, actually, it is not necessary to explain you the basic terms, the terminology. They have explained that. And we can see two factors which attract attention to the ESG risks and make them more relevant on the one hand. And the process of Euro integration of Ukraine is also very important in this respect. And also the obligations which Ukraine has taken to the sustainable development, and it is mentioned in the strategic document, the Ukraine facility in particular. And also we have to focus on the green reconstruction and the green recovery after the war in Ukraine. And the National Bank of Ukraine, for this purpose, have updated the policy of the sustainable financing. The previous policy was passed in 2021, and unfortunately, as of now, it has become quite obsolete. And due to the war and due to the progress which has been attained by the European Union during this period of time in terms of developing ESG directions and the ESG risks management, it is necessary to underscore that the European Union and its work and the rules and standards and norms which are implemented there are actually the important targets for us, and we continue to move in this direction. The new policy envisages the fact that we have to develop the ESG risk management policy at the level of the financial sector and the policy of development and management of ESG risks at the level of the regulator as a participant of the financial sector. And one of the first steps at the first phase was development of the white paper on the ESG risks management. We have completed internal discussion of this draft document, and the draft document was placed on the site of the National Bank. Please look at it. And at present, we are carrying out a dialogue with the stakeholders in this sector. And if you have proposals or comments to this document, please share them with us, and you will help us to improve this document. And this document is going to contain, and is containing already, the as-is status of the ESG risks management in the sector, the way we see it, and the vision of our perspective to which we have to move to as a sector, and the detailed plan, the regulatory activities by the NBU, which will help us to reach the new status with a 3 years horizon. And the white book is going to be presented in a minute. But before that, I would like to mention that the NBU, to be able to understand at which status the sector finds itself. First of all, the banking sector from the point of view of ESG risk management, the climate risks management. So the National Bank of Ukraine has carried out 2 polls as last year for the climate risks. And this year, we have obtained the first feedback on a wider list of the ESG risks. And the results of the last year's polling was reflected in the report on the financial stability in June. And in June this year, we plan to share the results of the polling of this year. And then we are continuing the proactive dialogue with the banking sector, represented by the Association of Banks and the stakeholders, including the international partners, to develop the ESG policy, to develop it in the optimal way, which will comply with the best European standards and practices. And what do we see in terms of a perspective of the development, ESG risk management in the national financial sector? And it was reflected in the White Book. We can see that as a key element, the fact that the banks have in the future to develop the strategic documents on the ESG risks management, that the ESG risks management has to be integrated into the system of corporate governance and the internal control of the financial institutions, and the fact that ESG risks have to be properly assessed, and that it is necessary to develop the optimal processes of interaction with the clients in the ESG aspects, and that the financial institutions will have to disclose the information on the ESG risks management. The process of integration of management of ESG risks into the system of the financial sectors is going to be done on gradual basis. And at the first phase, we started to interact with the banks this year, and the first regulatory steps are going to be related to the banks. And then we hope that this experience is going to be positive and it's going to be expanded to other participants of the financial sector in accordance with their importance for the system. First of all, these are going to be insurance organizations, and maybe a wider circle of participants is going to be engaged into this work from the financial sector. And from the point of view of the schedule of our activities, the way we see it, they are represented at the slide. You can see them. And this year, we are in dialogue discussing the tough regulatory requirements from the point of view of the pressure which is being carried out on the banks, but we cannot see those tough requirements and pressure of these tough requirements. But next year, we are going to provide the recommendations on the corporate governance issues from the point of view of integration of the aspects of it.
And only from 2027, We expect the adoption of the bylaws on ESG risks, including integrating ESG aspects into SREP and the disclosure requirements. For the non-banking institutions, this process will start a little later. And in parallel, there will be also processes for collecting data and reporting on sustainable development. We understand that for the banks, it is also important to receive information from their clients about their ESG aspects. So we will coordinate introduction of all these requirements with the general public processes and introduction of non-financial reporting in the corporate sector. And we will also monitor the trends of the ESG requirements at the EU level. So that was the brief overview on my part, and I will try to answer questions if there are any. Thank you. Thank you, Andriy. We see that the processes go ahead not just in the EU, but also the NBU did a lot of work. And this is my personal comment as the bank representative, that it's very logical and organically thought through, that there is no expectation from the banks to do this in 6 months or 1 year. So sometimes, you know, in Ukraine, there is this trend to even do it faster than the EU is doing. But it's very good to hear that there is a well thought expectations and timeline. Thank you again, and we will come back to that probably during the Q&A session. And now I would like to give the floor to Andriy Hrys, who is the representative of one of the banks that was the pioneer and gave a good example to other banks on how we can make the first steps and achieve good results, ESG risks assessment. I'm sure he has a lot of good advice, experience to share. So Andriy, please take the floor and tell us that it's actually all feasible in Ukrainian realities to work with these risks, not only inside the bank, but also with clients. Okay, thank you, Andriy. I hope you can all hear me. Yes, we can hear well. Hello, dear colleagues. Listening to the previous speakers, I decided to change the format of my presentation. And my presentation will be shared by the organizers, and I'm sure that everybody can review it on their own time, and you can read how the climate and ESG risk assessment is organized in the NBU. But I want to tell you more about the practical aspect, and let me share the screen.
Підкажіть, будь ласка, чи видно?
Can you see my screen? Yes, we can.
Так. Хочу почати з наступного.
Okay, let me start from the following. I'm sure that all the participants understand the environmental and social risk assessment. We divide it by 2 components. Environmental risk assessment, meaning how the project or the business activity will impact the environment, whether it's creating pollution, as a result of its activity? Is there any other impact, like biodiversity impact? Or is there a soil pollution? Are there going to be new emission created? Talking about the social risks assessment, well, here we primarily focus on the work conditions for the personnel working in the project, or subcontractors' working conditions. So this is first element. The second element of the social risk assessment is the impact on community, meaning are there any claims, complaints from the community members who live next door, because there are some cases in Ukraine when people live just, over the fence from the factory. Were there any court rulings on business activity, on postponing or any decisions to ban the activity? And this is done by the bank. And let me share the example of Ukrgasbank, where the ESG risk assessment, both for clients and any project, has been in place since 2016. We have updated it multiple times, but we use the IFC standards, the 8 standard. That was the foundation for our work. And here on the screen, you see the checklist of the questions we ask when we do the ESG risk assessment. And this list of questions is just an example. This has been sent to the Independent Banking Association by the ERF in the framework of Hrys program, which is using 579 project. I'm sure you have heard about it. So it has a certain list of business activities that have to go through environmental and social risk assessment. We are not talking about climate risk assessment. This is just a simple social and environmental risk assessment, but it's not as simple as it may seem. So this list of questions we send to clients, and we use 10 standards, not 8 standards expressly, but 10 standards of the World Bank. So let me briefly go through the main questions that we ask the clients and expect their answers with supporting documents. So for the general information, it is the type of business activity, which is the main activity for the company, as specified in their charter, or if it is up to 50% of their revenues. Number of staff, a list of business sites, locations, a number of vehicles, land bank, if it is an agricultural company, and the use of animals, if you talk about the farming. So the first standard, the question that we ask, assessment of environmental and social risks and outcomes. First question, does the company have a documented environmental and social policy? So does the company have an actual environmental and social policy? And in many cases, when we talk about SMEs, they don't have this policy. They have never thought about the need for such policy, but they come to you for loan, and the bank is asking these questions. They have certain requirements, and Hrys program is sharing these requirements through the Business Development Fund. So meaning a client needs to develop this policy and document it, put it on paper, sign it, and give it to the bank. If a company does not have that policy, we give them a certain template. We created such simple plate for them to use. And depending on the size of the company, the number of staff, the stakeholders, and so on, they can adopt this template and use it to develop their own policy. Next, is there a designated person responsible for the environment and social policy? It can be a CEO or a team. Most large companies have such a person, but if it's a small or a medium company, you are aware what kind of, companies that is. But it is a middle class that shapes the future of our country. They usually have a small staff from 1 to 5, and one person can be responsible for several business areas. Next question, does a company have a designated engineer responsible for environmental issues? Did the company perform environmental audit or went through the state environmental inspection? And what were the conclusions in the past? We can take like 3-year time period or even longer to see the outcomes of such state environmental inspection, whether there have been any complaints from the local community members. Next question, have there been any court rulings related to the business activity? Does the company have environmental impact assessment? They respond to these questions. And then we asked about the project design documentation. Second standard is the employment and working conditions. And here they describe the labor safety and security measures, whether the company is certified in line with ISO 45001. If we see that they have the system, then many questions are answered automatically. We have the confirming audit from the ISO requirements, and it simplifies the work for everybody. Next, we analyze the working relations with the staff, whether that employment contracts or subcontractual relations. So anything related to HR, whether they have labor contracts in place, is there a person responsible for labor conditions, fire safety? Usually we analyze if there is no one and it is important, then we make this as a requirement. Next is effective use of resources and prevention of pollution. And then we analyze whether the company is in line with the third standard of the World Bank. Again, we look at ISO 9001, ISO 14001, and I see some participants here are definitely aware of such standards, and they know that you need to check that it's truly implemented in their business operations and not is just on paper. Next is the emissions, and we analyze those companies that have emitting installations, whether they have the permission to do that. We need to explain to them that this is required by law. What are the sanctions related to those emissions? It's quite a complex work, but we are persevering. Do they have a declaration working with the hazards and so on? We move on to the questionnaire. So we analyze the full emissions area, and we try to understand how aware the management, like whether they have permission to do the to generate the emissions.
Особливо, якщо це сільське господарство, вони працюють десь там дуже далеко від Києва і взагалі не ходять на подібного роду семінари.
Especially if these are agricultural companies which are working away from at a long way from Kiev. And so this is not the full list, and there could be other items, but it will be very important for us to at least see the general picture, which will give us an opportunity to understand the status of the clients, and also water supply and water treatment. Well, whether there is an agreement with the water supply company and what are the water treatment facilities, and whether they have the permits for water usage, and where they purify the wastewater, and whether they are using the circular system of water supply. These questions are related to the usage, and in some cases they are included into the contracts. But if it is a large production company, then the additional mechanisms of control on behalf of the banks are to be used, and the bank has to have the experts to be able to understand this issue and to analyze the permit for the emissions. And again, the waste management, starting from the simplest thing, whether classification of the waste has been carried out, whether there is a plan of management of the waste, and these questions have to be aligned with the requirements of the legislation of Ukraine. And some companies do not realize that, and we do not have that much time to do these assessments, so that the bank can continue a process of lending. We have mentioned the most common waste which could be generated as a result of the operation of the company, and the bank can choose the items which are to be analyzed with the bank, and whether the separate collection of waste is being carried out by the company, and the arguments are to be put forward to make a conclusion. The enterprises have to provide the permits, and if the permits are not available, we have to get an explanation why they are not available, and then we have to discuss whether they are going to work on the estimating the emissions into the atmosphere. Then we are analyzing the hazardous substances, the fuels and things like that. And the clients have to give the answers to this question, whether these are available or not. And well, if certain questions are not relevant, we are just deleting it from the questionnaire. And we actually look at the superficial analysis of the operation of the company. And also, well, we are looking at the hazardous impact of the activities of the enterprise. And we have to specify all these issues, but it is not directly required. But we have to be sure that the company does not generate negative factors on the environment, but we identify the negative factors, and we ask the enterprise to provide the information about thereof, and also whether there were any complaints on behalf of the communities, of the public, whether the public hearings have been carried out, and well, also acquisition of the land plots and the usage of the land plots. The forced relocation also has to be analyzed, and also it is important for us that the information is relevant, or it is very important to get some confirmation information. If the company does not have any documents, so it's not going to receive the loan because the bank cannot take up these risks. Also the conservation of the biodiversity and natural resources management questions are being asked, and then the cultural heritage, and the 9th standards is being not used because it's not relevant for the Ukrainian business. And also the 10th one is the stakeholders engagement, whether the company is working with the stakeholders and has a plan of the stakeholder management. And we provide the questionnaire to the company, and the questionnaire gives an answer, yes or no. If the company provides the copies of documents, we analyze it, and the bank expert prepares the opinion, defines the category of risks. If we are talking about the IFC, it's 2-level categorization. In European banks, it's the 3-level categorization, and we decide whether this project is acceptable and is eligible for financing or not. And the opinion is being issued, and the opinion is being attached to the file. And if the company doesn't have any documents of this kind, and they do not have any plans for management or whatever which is envisaged by the law, and it has to be sanctioned for that. So all this information is being analyzed, and it's included into the conditions of lending. For example, to get the permit for the emissions. And questions. Thank you very much, Andriy, for this short information. And the question, is it for the projects which are to be financed? We are looking at it not for all the projects. We look at what is envisaged by the standards of construction. It fits into some construction norms. So this section is to be included into the project documentation, and we have to ask these questions. But if, for example, the company doesn't construct anything, so we do not require this. Andriy, could you please give an answer to this question, because the most popular question in the chat, whether it is possible to get this questionnaire. You have my contact information at the presentation. Please call and ask. And there is another important issue. If the client has no permits for usage, it might happen. They have no policies, no permits, and don't worry. The experts of the bank will always be ready to explain what documents are required. And we have developed with the Association of Banks the environmental compacts, and it is going to be sent to all the banks, and they are going to interact on the basis of their offer with the clients, and they will explain how to get this document and how they have to submit the declaration and things like that. So don't worry, just apply to us and you will get assistance from us. If we are talking about the program of the 579, about 30 banks in Ukraine, both the public banks and the banks with the international investment, have received the confirmation from the international institutions that their system of environmental management is quite adequate, and they carry out the efficient risk, social and economic risks management. So thank you for your attention. So esteemed speakers, esteemed participants, we have actually extended the time of this seminar, but we would like to complete our discussion, but we are going to send you all the materials, and you will be able to contact the specialists who will be able to give the answers to your question. Mr. Danilenko asks for the floor. Thank you very much. I would like to make a short remark to your comment of the fact that the banks have time to prepare themselves for new regulatory requirements. It's true, but I would like to encourage you to start preparing now, because the preparation takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. efforts, and the sooner you start, the sooner you will be able to get competitive advantages, because the compliance with the ESG criteria for a lot of banks is a competitive and thank you very much for this remark. I would like to confirm that this is a very important topic. We are following up this topic starting from 2020, and we understand those who started sooner now have a better competitive advantage. And this is dealing not only with the climate and the environmental risks, but also this really is part of the reality of carrying business in Ukraine, and also meeting the expectations of the donors and stakeholders are to be met, those stakeholders who are developing these programs together with us. And on this optimistic note, I would like to thank everyone, and we hope to see you soon, and goodbye and all the best to you. Everybody is saying goodbye.